Hi, and welcome to Postscript. I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and it's great to have you with us here. Coming to you from Berkeley Springs in West Virginia, just down the road from Washington and Baltimore. We do this once a month or so when we have speakers here in our little resort town who come from all over the world, for that matter, for a speaker series that we sponsor called Berkeley Springs Transition Talks. And Transition Talks is all about the basic idea that there's huge change going on this planet right now, both in terms of humanity and the way we all live, that is moving us into an era that for which you have no history, and you really don't even have, in some cases, good ideas about what's coming this way. It's a huge, amazing kind of transition that's coming, and so we try to feature provocative speakers and people with interesting ideas about how we get from here to there and what's on the horizon. This week our guest is Charles Eisenstein. Charles is an old friend of ours who's been here a number of years in the past. And he is an author and a big thinker and a philosopher, and I call him an economist, but he kind of waves that off and says he isn't an economist, but it's very nice.
Not an economist, no.
But it's nice to have you with us, Charles.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what's on your mind? What have you been thinking about lately?
Well, for the last 15 minutes, I've been thinking about UFOs and
aliens, right?
Aliens. We've had this little conversation about it. And, you know, I wrote a book on climate change, as you know, trying to bring in a bigger picture. Because I think that so often at this time of transition, we don't even know how to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
It's not like we need to find the answers to the questions that we already have, but we don't even know the right questions to ask, because the questions that we ask are based on a worldview that
came from the past.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that as these new conditions are coming in totally from off the map,
right.
the questions lock us into a way of seeing and thinking that doesn't serve anymore. And so there's a letting go that has to happen that can often be quite traumatic.
Yeah.
To let go of dearly held worldviews that seem like they were reality itself.
It's kind of like religions, and, you know, kind of generically or metaphorically, that you have all these impacted ideas or concepts.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So when I speak about climate change, I don't necessarily say, okay, guys, so there are, you know, authentic UFO sightings and the government has known about it. Like, I don't necessarily go there, but I try to, and that's not the only piece that has the potential to totally disintegrate conventional understandings of reality. But without naming them explicitly, I'm speaking from an understanding of those things.
Yes.
And always looking for what's the next organic expansion.
Right.
Because so much of what we take for granted, say about climate change, and I'm talking we here as conventional opinion,
right.
And the despair around it, which is profound in many quarters of society and paralyzing for many people. That despair is based on a worldview that is very small.
And collapsing, right.
Yeah. And a lot of people, they simultaneously, they're like, yes, I believe in science, I believe in climate change, and we're doomed. And at the same time, they might totally accept the phenomenon of UFOs, or psi phenomena, or anomalous healing, or all these other things that you have transition talks about.
Yes, right.
But those are in a different compartment.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what happens if you let those in? What happens to your despair when your theory of change and your theory of reality expands? Then you realize that the despair is not rational.
No.
It's not logical. Therefore, it must be coming from something else. And that is one of the threads I follow in this work. What's the psychological source of the despair?
It's interesting, because I was thinking explicitly about this yesterday as I was driving, and about how that the that you are so constrained by, you know, what you bring into the room with you, because that's all you've got. And the intrinsic part of this kind of transition to a new world is this necessity to kind of open up into and be permeable to new ideas and other kind of things, because it's those new ideas that are going to populate this whole new world. And how you get from here to there is all about hope, in my mind. Is that you're talking about despair, and the despair is linked to the collapse or the implosion of the present system, and what the alternative to that that has to be presented is a sense of hope, because that points people to the new direction.
Right. From the mindset of despair, hope seems like just some kind of self-delusion.
Depends on how you define
It's
hope.
like you can't take the grim reality of it, John. So you've invented these, you've invented these irrational, unscientific ideas, and then you bring in speakers to confirm them. And you've that's what I've been in that state before, where I just can't take the bitter truth, and it's all like that's a state of being that I've recognized as it's like the state of being magnetizes the ideas and narratives to it. So I think that
sounds like low-grade depression.
Yeah, I mean, I've visited it before.
Yeah.
I'm not there right now.
Right.
But
good.
But like more generally, when we talk about people's resistance to letting in these new ideas, that resistance might be coming from the repulsion of a certain state of being that is contradictory to those ideas.
Right.
And in order for that state of being to maintain itself, those ideas have to be kept out. So the story that we hold has an immune system that keeps out invaders. And the story isn't just an intellectual construct, it's also an emotional, psychological construct.
Well, you've been taught it from your youth. The whole society is giving you these stakes into the ground of reality, to build this paradigm built around religion and government and how
and economics too.
Yeah.
Because the whole economic system only makes sense from a very narrow reality.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah. So if you pull the pins on that, then the whole thing reorganizes. Right. Yeah, and that's what we're in the middle of.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, the letting go is big and part of what.
So how do you get from here to there?
I think that it's happening to us, that our agency in this process is a lot smaller than we would like to think. That there are mysterious forces at work, cosmic forces, geological forces. The Earth itself is going through a metamorphosis, and we're feeling the effects of that, which doesn't mean sit back and do nothing, but it's to recognize that something profound is happening and to prepare ourselves by giving attention to what's coming up.
Well, I would say that it is not just let it happen from the out. There's kind of a balance between internal kind of reorganization and learning and change to adapt to this new world that is a function of the things that are happening on the outside as well. But as you suggest, you can't just sit here and let it all.
Yeah, it's a matter of participation.
Yeah,
that's
you have to.
The word I would use. Yeah,
you're right. You're becoming a new human. I mean, so they're not just doing it to you.
Right. Yeah, and in a way, we look at these. You're a futurist, so one of the conceits of I call it the age of separation, is that reality is a subjective thing outside of ourselves, and therefore there is a future, the future.
Right.
But maybe a better way to think about it is that there are multiple timelines going into multiple futures that coexist in a quantum superposition.
That's right. You're just trying to complicate this whole thing, I can tell.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is then the choice becomes not what is going to happen, but which future do I want to participate in?
That's right. Yeah.
And serve.
No, literally.
Yeah.
I mean, there's kind of, for what it's worth, physics and scientific and quantum and all that kind of stuff who are talking about those possibilities, to say nothing about the things that are coming out of the metaphysical and the other spaces. No, absolutely. this new world is so much more complicated and strange compared to the linear kind of mindset that we all grew up with, that it is by definition going to drive you into seeing yourself and your work and the reality in fundamentally different ways. And if you can't make that change, then you're holding on. I mean, it's going to be a tough ride.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's already a tough ride. I don't even want to say even for me, but for me, like each person I've found is rooted in the worldview of separation in a unique way.
Yeah.
And so the cognitive dissonance and the
Sure.
uncertainty takes a different form for each person.
Yeah, but it's so fundamental, and it's one thing to just try to make that kind of transition away from that and intellectualize it, but everywhere you look around, everything is separate. So, I mean, what have you found is the best way to kind of work your way into that space? I mean, it's the we're all one kind of thing. Well, yeah, I can.
Yeah, it's not about entertaining the correct idea in your mind. For me.
Yeah.
For me, it's about.
Yeah, but it's a mindset. There's a transition into a space where you see yourself and the world in a different way, and it's more than just intellectual. You've internalized it in some kind of way, and I'm trying to figure out where that is.
For me, it's a process of accepting and taking in for lack of a better word, the medicine that's offered to me through life experiences, through the stories that come in, through encounters with remarkable people that cause a change in me that changes who I am as a doer and as a chooser. It's not for me so much about how do I do this? Mm-hmm. How do I do this change?
Right.
But it's a stance of gratitude that it's like, wow, this is happening to me. And to dare to let that in and to let that happen and to believe that such a big change could happen feels really audacious.
Yeah.
And even that isn't something that I can do. Okay, here's my do, let it in. But it's just and so I could even note to people like, hey, something is happening to you. And that piece of information could launch a evolutionary process.
But if you don't hear that message, then you miss it. There's a kind of a notion here of permeability, I like to think about it, to let the light, let the ideas, let these little messages, these weak signals in, and hear the weak signals, because as you suggest, the universe, the environment, call it whatever you'd like, is alive and it's intelligent, and it's feeding you these cues for this evolutionary process if you hear them. I mean.
Yeah. And so then the listener might be like, okay, so I'm going to try to hear those. And I would say, maybe you're making it harder than it has to be.
That's right.
Maybe what's happening is you are already hearing them, and you're going to start hearing a lot more of them. And that prompt becomes true just because I said it.
That's right, because then you open up your sensitivity and see the things for what they are that you haven't before.
Right. And that means that, and this applies to me as well, it means that the way to do it is for somebody else to give you the right words at the right time, or the right information or the right experience at the right time.
That's why you read books. That's why you go to conferences. That's why you come to transition talks.
Right. In other words, we're doing it for each other.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So you got to find the right group. You got to kind of hang in the right space. You know, you got to work your way, and you can't just.
And maybe you'll be attracted to the right group in the right space.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. I mean, in some kind of seemingly magical kind of way. I mean, I really believe in that. I mean, there's almost like a big magnet or something that's kind of drawing and pull.
If I lived closer, I would come to some of these transition talks, because I really appreciate the way that they, in different ways, each one breaks reality. Well, maybe not all of them, but many of them break reality in a certain way. And I imagine people leaving the transition talks not quite as sure as before that they really know how this world works.
That's good. That's the idea. Yeah.
Unknowing is underrated these days.
Yeah.
We need some more unknowing and more uncertainty and acknowledgement that we don't know.
I don't think you know anything. I mean, absolutely. I mean, if you really think about it, everything are these ideas and concepts and other kind of things. But in terms of really knowing something, I know you haven't done this, but I did some psilocybin once. But
That's illegal. I don't think I've
no,
ever done anything like that.
As a matter of fact, this was government sanctioned with a major university, anyway, at Johns Hopkins, and which was the wildest day in my life. Frankly, it was more fun and more terror than I've ever had. But what I figured out was that there is a place of reality that is like 100 times more real than this is. And once you play in that space for just a little bit, then you come back and, like you say, and you say, well, wait a second. I mean, what is this contrived thing that we've got going? Because I've been there where it's a whole lot more than that.
So this is I think a key aspect of the civilizational transformation, this thing that's happening to us through the reception. I mean, I used the word medicines before, but in this case, it's very literal.
Yes, right.
These psychedelic substances that have come in at just the right moment to quicken an evolutionary process that wouldn't happen without them. If we were left to our own devices, we'd be stuck in our own reality. But the generosity of the universe is such that these substances appeared, sometimes literally out of nowhere in the case of LSD, or from indigenous societies that had kept them secret and safe until the moment for their efflorescence into mass consciousness had come. And it is, and the authorities recognized the danger. They recognized, even though they're not addictive, there's not much potential for abuse, they were like, if we let this stuff proliferate, society as we know it will be over.
Right.
They were right.
Yeah.
And since then, even despite the suppression, it's been hollowing the narrative core of our society, leaving an increasingly fragile shell. And maybe that shell is ready to break.
Well, I would agree with you completely. This is June the 15th today when we're doing this interview, and in September, I believe it is, September, we have a transition talk speaker who's Dr. Brian Sanderoff, who's coming from Baltimore, who is the medical director of one of the the largest marijuana cannabis operations in the state, and he's going to come and talk specifically about the role that marijuana and hallucinogens have played in the evolutionary process of species in the past and so on. And so, there's all this stuff that's happening.
Oh, yeah, it's just coming out everywhere now.
I know. And you look at it and say, where did that come from? I mean, it's I don't know. It's fascinating.
It's funny that people still call them hallucinogens when it's almost the opposite. They almost like bring you to reality, and what we call reality is the hallucination.
Well, yeah, that's the case. That's an argument can be made for dreams and so on, and what is real? I mean, Robert, what's his name, wrote this wonderful book. Anton Wilson wrote this up, a book about his life where he took 2 years or 3 years and went out and looked at everything in terms of drugs and everything in terms of religion and everything in terms of esoteric or kind of mystical kind of thing. And he came back and the bottom line was, it's anything you want it to be. I mean, reality is whatever you want it to be, and if you change your mind appropriately and effectively enough, you can. You can.
For me, though, that brings up the question of, can you actually change your mind through an act of will? And if not, then how do minds change, and what is our role in the modification of our own beliefs and stories?
How do you change your mind if you don't change it as a function of will?
That's one of the questions that I would say is the right
Yeah, you
question.
would allow that people change their minds, of course.
I don't know the answer to that question, but I know that that's the right question. And the idea of the separate self in the driver's seat manipulating all of reality, that is...
So you're saying you may not change your mind, somebody else or something else could change your mind, right?
Or maybe your mind isn't what you think it is. Maybe your mind, like it opens up these questions. I don't know the answer. You know, I'm not that deep a mystic. I don't know the answer.
Right.
But I know the question.
Yeah.
Like the Robert Anton Wilson, whimsical separate self that I can believe anything I want and it becomes so. That reminds me of the technological master of the universe, arranging reality according to his design.
Either that or, stumbling on the reality that your mind is all powerful and can essentially manufacture whatever it wants to be, which of course is one of the principles of some of the mystical or metaphysical or spiritual kind of things that talk about the evolution of
Yeah, so let me link that to something I said before. I said something about that you are becoming more and more aware of these anomalous data points. New perceptions are happening to you, new experiences, and you are noticing them more.
Yeah.
And then I said the fact that I said that makes
it's like
it true.
buying a new car where you see the stuff all the car is the same car again. Okay.
Right. So the fact that I said that makes it true.
Yeah.
That's called prophetic speech.
Huh.
That speaks something into reality. But that's not actually an arbitrary power. For prophetic speech to work, you have to name something that's already true. And your words become a tool of that thing to birth itself into our experiential reality.
Maybe everything's true and everything exists and all you have to do is access it and bring it here.
Maybe. Or maybe there are some things that are true and some things that are not. And maybe...
How would you know?
That's another good question. So we look at these multiple timelines. You're a futurist, so we were talking about this before, what's the future? Maybe there are many futures that coexist in possibility, but that doesn't mean that anything goes.
Right.
Like, is there a future with, cigarette trees and the whiskey bubbling out of the spring, the Big Rock Candy Mountain? Like, right. Or is that actually a fantasy? Is there such a thing as something that's just a fantasy and something that has the ring of truth when you speak of it, which may not mean that there are not other things that have the ring of truth that contradict it? But this is the kind of thing that I've been thinking about a lot.
You're making the case that anything, you can make it whatever way you want to. I mean, that could be true, that could be true. I could, what do you want?
Yeah. And what I'm saying is that there's a big mystery here. As we learn that truth cannot be reduced to facts,
right?
Cannot be reduced to objective facts,
right?
That's a liberatory realization. And the first step is, well, maybe the truth can be whatever we want it to be. But after that, the question deepens and becomes more subtle. And if it's not either of those, then what is truth? If it's not objective
maybe
fact,
it's all subjective.
Maybe it's all subjective, but what is it? And why do some things feel true even if you don't have any evidence for them, and others don't?
Well, we're out of time, so we're going to have to
talk. Well, I hope that wasn't all too abstract. I don't know why.
We'll solve that the next time.
Yeah.
It's awfully nice to have you with us.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
That was quite a rabbit hole. I hope it wasn't too much of it.
It was wonderful.
All right.
And thank you, Charles Eisenstein, and thank you for being with us here on Transition Talks and on Postscript. You can find out more information about what we're doing here in Berkeley Springs at transitiontalks.org, and we hope that you'll come and be with us. We got a wonderful lineup of interesting people. Greg Braden will be with us here in August. And Dr. Penny Kelly will be here next month in July, and we've got a lineup going through the next of the year and into the next year. So thank you again, and I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and come visit us here in Berkeley Springs.